Now the tide is turning, hear the sound. It's our home, it's our fight. We stand as one, we'll make it right. We face the flood, the fire, the strain. Independence rise, we'll break their chain. Monaro strong, we won't be swayed. Truth and justice never fade.
Good afternoon. It's great to have you with us, Peter. Thank you for coming onto the Monaro Zone. You've made quite a stir online with your Supreme Court action against the Snowy Monaro Regional Council.
Well, it's not my action. It's Ms. Woolley's action. Miss Woolley has got property, had damage, and has not got the financial ability to encourage council to resolve her claim.
So, Peter, for those that are just tuning in and are unfamiliar with what happened on January the 4th, 2020, what happened?
A state of emergency, the third state of emergency, was declared on the 2nd of January. Council started filling a reservoir that had been left decommissioned the previous 2 and a bit years. They were only supposed to fill it to 75%. They had engineering reports telling them they can't fill it at all, and it collapsed, and 4,500 million litres of water instantly went downhill and smashed into homes and broke down doors and smashed windows and drove cars down roads, and Miss Woolley's property was, I would think, geographically the first one to be hit. It was a vacant block, but it was fenced and had a carport, and it took all of the fences, smashed the carport, and removed all of her soil and replaced it with flood debris, and that debris contaminated.
So, let's just start. Who is Sonia Woolley, and why
Sonia Woolley's
is her...
a long-standing resident. She lived 8 years in Bradbow, and she lived 8 years in Cooma. She left Cooma, around 2010. She bought this property with the intention of perhaps one day relocating back here, and she paid her rates. Didn't have a house there, but she still had to pay water rates and had to pay sewage rates, and she paid her rates, did all the right thing.
And why is this case only now going to the Supreme Court? It's been 5 years.
Well, Sonia put well, firstly, council, they can send her a rate notice, but they never told her that, sorry, we've damaged your property, and they never told her that she needs to check to make sure there's no asbestos in the debris. So here she is living in Queensland at the time it happened, and a neighbour contacts her and says, "Oh, Sonia, your property's been damaged. Did you know?" And she said, "Well, no, I don't know anything about it. What's happened?" And it was explained to her, and they had a flyer that council had put out about contacting council's loss adjusters to lodge a claim, because Sonia wasn't insured. It was a vacant block. She could see no reason to have it insured. It was uninsured. And she put a claim in on the 10th of February 2020. And according to council, it was her claims been mislaid. According to the loss adjusters, they actually closed her file. According to the insurers, they and council parted ways in 2021, 12 months after the incident. Who would know what's happening? We certainly don't know what's happening. Sonia's been trying to get a negotiated settlement with them for 5 years, on and off. The council keep telling her it's with our insurers, Property claims have got a statute of limitations of 6 years, which is up this year. So she had no option. She had to take an action, and she came to the advocates to see if we might be prepared to help her. Because the first thing she would need to do is establish that, in fact, council was liable. I mean, you can't give council a bill without saying why they owe money.
So just to confirm, because it seems a bit incredulous that this has taken 5 years to come to the court system, that her initial claim was lost, that it was closed, that she's been ignored, and that she's failed in achieving a settlement. Is that correct?
Well, there's another interesting turn here, in that after she was advised that her file had been closed and archived, this is in 2022, she contacted council directly, and eventually in 2023, another 12 months later, she gets an offer, not from the insurance company, but on behalf of the council. So then we found a motion that it wasn't passed, but the motion went to council in 2021 in October. Councillor Anne Maslin at the time said she's putting a motion to look into council's insurances because there were gaps, and where the tank wasn't covered, and apparently a lot of claims against the council weren't covered, and that was costing council money.
This sounds very familiar to a motion that was recently rejected as well, I think proposed by Councillor Rose to look into council insurance. Are they similar?
Exactly the same thing. So the current councillors, or the block as we call them, for whatever reason, are resisting any transparency, which only fuels people's concerns that, something wrong here. And me, at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is help an elderly citizen, a lovely person, to just get a fair settlement for the damage to her property. She's done nothing wrong.
So what kind of emotional toll has it taken on her to be forced into this legal action just to get recognition for what's happened?
Sonia has got no financial means. She's elderly. She's now had to apply for a pension. She's just had to apply for. She's got a loan on this property. She's had to apply to the bank to stave off having to make any payments because she can't afford to make the payments. She's living in Tasmania, where she'd relocated to look after her terminally ill brother. She can't even afford the rent anymore. She's had to put him into full-time care. She's living in a converted shipping container, and everything her whole worldly possessions are tied up in this block that she can't even sell because of the damage, unless she was dishonest and didn't tell people. But she's a very Christian woman, and she would not tell people what they're buying.
At the very minimum, has council ever offered her an apology or even acknowledgement of what she's been through?
None.
That's so hard to believe. Why wouldn't they even apologize?
I think your listeners will have to draw their own conclusions. We're now in court. I'm assisting her. We can't be wrong to draw conclusions.
Well, let's move on to the legal claims. So part of the legal claim is that council knew the tank was unsafe. How do you substantiate that claim?
Okay. I'll just give you facts. I won't draw conclusions. In 2013, 2014, the tank was decommissioned and a substantial repair was undertaken. At the conclusion of that repair, council's internal advice to themselves is the tank cannot be filled above 75% ever again in the future. As little as 2 years after that repair, the tank started leaking again, and in 2017 it was taken out of service so that they could assess whether the tank could in fact be repaired or whether it had to be replaced. Public Works came in, had a look at it in 2018. They determined that it could crack in service and that specialist engineering advice was required. They got that advice from a business called ALS Industries, and in 2019, January, they gave up their final report, which gave them, I think it was 27 repairs were required. 15 of them were extremely critical. As part of that report, they're required to provide a risk assessment and a consequence assessment, and they gave it the very highest risk of extremely critical. And if you use it, it's extremely critical risk that you're going to introduce. And the consequences were possibly, fatalities, loss of infrastructure, damage to property. So, did people know? What do you think? What would you draw from that? Would you think you know that you got a problem here?
Oh, I'm not making any conclusions, but it's certainly hard to believe that people didn't know that the tank was in dire condition.
Well, see, there's another interesting thing too, and that is that work health and safety, which is a very, very important part in any community structure, to provide a safe working environment for when we go to work, and a safe environment around workplaces, from workplaces. The tank or the reservoir was a workplace, and where you're commissioning apparatus, there are protocols that are required at law by the Work Health and Safety Act. None of those protocols were followed. They didn't even consider them. They didn't.
Well, let's just start with the basic question. Who authorized the filling of the tank?
Well, there's only one person that can authorise things in a council, and that's the general manager.
And that would have been?
No need to name names.
Okay.
The authority is the general manager.
And so he would have authorized the filling of the tank?
I have a document that was produced by council, a summary of what they say happened, and in that document, the general manager was aware before they commenced filling the tank that they were going to fill the tank.
And what role did Peter Beer play in this event?
Okay, Peter Beer was the mayor at the time. 12 days earlier, 12 days before they started filling the tank, there was a council meeting, just their normal monthly meeting. And at that meeting, the officers proposed that the recommendations of the repair methodology of the ALS Industries be adopted. There was a price tag and a tender for $920,000. The motion to adopt the recommendation of the officers was put by John Rooney. The mayor at the meeting was Peter Beer, and without undertaking any of those repairs, they commenced filling the tank on the 2nd of January. It reached full at noon on the Saturday, the 4th. Police were notified that the tank had cracked and was gushing water. They advised the council. Police note that council attended at 1 p.m. Council have admitted that from their own records that they were there. And of course, we all know that the tank failed.
So the fact that council had voted to undertake repairs just weeks before the event, is that not also evidence that they were aware that the tank was in urgent need of repairs?
Well, look, I think a better question is, should someone have asked more questions? What role did the council, or did the councillors have a role? And I think the answer is, well, yes, they did have a role. You get such a catastrophic event, they're there to represent the community, to ask the tough questions. How did this happen? Did we follow protocols? Have we done something we can learn from? What are the lessons here that we can learn so that can't happen again? Is there something wrong with our decision-making processes? But it doesn't appear that any of these questions were asked or answered.
Now, because of the extremely long length of time that has passed, we've actually had 3 different sets of mayors now, starting with Peter Beer, then Narelle Davis, and now currently Chris Hanna. Has the situation improved, or is silence still the game being played?
They're still stonewalling. I've been trying to get a simple investigation since 2021. That's how Sonia came to find me. She found me on Facebook, and she saw that I'd done a lot of work, and perhaps I might have an interest in trying to help. But you see, under the code of conduct, which all councillors and council staff are bound by, and it's interesting, they've got a performance improvement order that's all about their code of conduct and to maintain the code of conduct. They actually signed documents to say that they're going to comply with the code of conduct. Well, under that code of conduct, there's a section called 3.12, in regard to work health and safety. They must obligated, in other words, they're obligated to report incidents and, together with the general manager, investigate them. They've never produced an investigation of the tank.
Let me try and speak in defense of Peter Beer and Narelle Davis. On previous occasions, I've spoken to Peter Beer, and he's claimed that he's never seen this report that said the tank was of unstructural value. And I've spoken to Narelle Davis, and she claimed that everyone was justified in filling the tank because the town was in immediate danger.
Well, look, I can't say who did and didn't see the report. It's not attached to the business papers that they voted on. But you would think a reasonable person, after the tank went down, would have gone, I just voted to have that fixed. Where's that? I better get a copy of that report and have a look at it. Apparently that never happened. They were still obligated to do an investigation. Didn't happen. They're still, to this day, obligated to do an investigation. They still haven't done it.
Let me clarify. 5 years on, and there's been no investigation?
None.
That's so hard to believe. And how about Narelle's claim that everyone was justified in filling the tank because the fire was an imminent threat?
Well, how does she come to that conclusion in the absence of an investigation or a report? That's just personal opinion. As the mayor provided at the time, in 2022, when I had a meeting with her, she had an obligation to look into those things, not to have an opinion. She's entitled to an opinion. I didn't go to see her there as Narelle Davis, ex-nurse. I went there to see her as my mayor. And as my mayor, she had a statutory obligation to base any opinion on an investigation.
Now, in one of the claims made in the legal document, it says that asbestos was soon discovered on Sonia's property. Is that correct? Correct.
So when Sonia put her claim in 2020, council had they'd never spoken to her. They still have never spoken. They've still never told her that her property's been damaged and that they did the damage, and they still haven't told her that asbestos is there. So she didn't know about any of that, and I don't think they were ever going to tell her. And it was only when she reached out to the advocates that we said, well, have you got any asbestos on your property? She said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, the general manager at the time, on the 23rd of January, advised everybody that they need to be mindful of asbestos, that their crews cleaning up were doing so with asbestos regulations, following procedures for asbestos. Have you looked at asbestos? She said, well, no, I haven't. So she then went and got a report and said, well, yes, Sonia, you've got asbestos. Now, it can't be existing asbestos because she was the first property that was hit. There's no house on it. Well, I wanted to go there for a moment because I've spoken to some staff anonymously regarding this issue, and their claim would be, how do you prove that that asbestos was not originally there? Good question. Good question. But I think it's reasonable to assume that her property was the first property to be hit, and it removed all of her topsoil and replaced it with rubble. I mean, the house next to her, so the house acted as a wall for the mud coming down the mountain. 50 cubic tons of mud against one house on one side of it. 50 cubic tons of mud on the other side. So you can't tell me that what's on her property didn't come from above.
But I believe in one of the business papers it said that it's been confirmed that there's no asbestos in the pipes, and so it couldn't have come from a council tank.
Well, the asbestos could have come from anywhere. I mean, there's asbestos on her property. There's asbestos. What's interesting is there's a property further down from Sonia's property. It's a residential home. And when this gentleman had people come to do work on his property, they had to stop work. And they went and got people in to assess the asbestos that they found on the property. And this is after council had done their cleanup. And I've got a copy of that report, and it clearly evidences asbestos. And this is, I don't know, 152, no, it'd be more than that, maybe 250 metres downhill from Sonia's property. So, I don't know, there's bush between the residential homes and where the reservoirs are located. There's roads through there, bush tracks. Could there have been an illegal asbestos dump? Who would know?
But you would claim that the source isn't important. What's important is that water tank collapse pushed that asbestos downhill.
No, I can't even say that. All you can definitively say is that the property is contaminated with asbestos, and it needs to be considered in any settlement.
Now, in regards to the settlement, I believe Sonia is claiming over $1 million in damages. Is that a fair and a proportionate figure?
It's the upper limit. When I say it's the upper limit, following the council advice that she needed to take into account asbestos, she's had 2 asbestos specialists now, one confirming the presence of asbestos and the other giving 3 tiers of what would be required. The level would depend on about a $25,000 examination of her site. The lowest remediation price is about $250,000, and the upper limit is $800,000. Now, I would think, but I'm not a specialist, that it's not going to be the upper limit. It'll be the lower limit. But of course, Sonia hasn't got $25,000, $30,000 to pay someone to go and do a report. So that part of the claim, it's been identified that there are 3 levels, but you put your claim in for the upper level, and then you determine at what level it sits. Well, you can only do that subsequent to doing the examination.
Now, recently, Deputy Mayor Tricia Hopkins went on TV to say the best was done at the time, and people are just looking forward to moving on. How do you respond to that, knowing that Sonia still has to live with asbestos contamination and with no compensation or remediation?
I think it was a very disappointing comment by Tricia Hopkins. I've always found her to be a bit more sensitive to situations than that. Maybe it was a off-the-cuff comment on her part. Poor old Sonia is, I shouldn't call her poor old, but she is poor and she is old. Sonia would love to get on with her life. She's contacted council and people council has asked her to contact over 150 times. The current general manager in December promised the councillors that he would get this matter resolved, and 4 months later, he just keeps telling everybody the same thing. It's in the hands of council's insurers. Well, it's been in the hands of council's insurers for going on 6 years. How long have we got to wait?
I just want to confirm that because that number just seems so massive. Sonia's tried to resolve this with over 150 contacts to the council, and it has not yet been resolved over 5 years.
Correct. Culminating in last year, she put a letter of demand to bring it to a head, and she got a response on behalf of council to say it was with council's insurers.
And this is
That was
5
in
years
April
on.
last year. So 12 months later, it's still with council's insurers. But it's been with council's insurers for... Is council insured? That's a good question.
And it seems incredible that despite all this, council will not officially clear her land or remediate her land or even give a certificate acknowledging the contamination or remediation of that property.
No, won't.
Why not?
You're asking the wrong person. Sonia is a reasonable person. I'm a reasonable person. All I want to see is a reasonable settlement for Sonia and everybody get on with their lives. Why this is going on after almost 6 years, I cannot fathom, Chris. Makes no sense.
These sorts of stories really upset me a lot, the injustice of it all, because it seems like there have been people that have been paid out, and some people have been paid out very handsomely. Have you spoken to other residents, such as Kylie Keenan, who in a similar situation has no support and no friends inside council, and after 5 years has received no compensation?
No, I've not spoken to Kylie.
Now, do you believe that if this had happened to the property of Mayor Davis or Peter Beer, do you think that they would be seeing the same amount of delay and denial?
Chris, I think we need to just focus on the real issue here, and that is we elect councillors to be our representatives. We trust them. We put our trust in them. They actually give an oath to place our interests first. This hasn't happened. And you should be talking to some of these people to try and understand why not. Where is the investigation? Why is Sonia still waiting after 6 years? Why are they treating her like this too? I personally think they're just trying to drag her out over the statute of limitations. I honestly believe that. They would have worked out that she doesn't have any money to fight them, and that if they drag her out, they won't have to pay anything. It's a very bloody-minded attitude.
That's horrific. That's a horrific idea. Why do you think some councillors, even now, seem more concerned with protecting councillors' reputation than fixing the damage?
I don't know, but it's council's reputation they're protecting.
Could you be more specific?
Well, Chris, the people that continually vote as a bloc, the people that voted recently as January this year, voted against an investigation, even though there's a statutory obligation to investigate. They voted against it. That's an illegal vote. They voted against divulging how much money council has paid out in uninsured claims. And we know there are gaps in insurance, but they've voted against releasing that information. The same group of people have voted against releasing information on what mayors and deputy mayors have received in office. And they're all members of the previous council.
I think
I'm not going to say any more.
For the sake of the listeners, can you be specific regarding which councillors and which mayors have voted against transparency?
I'll let you do that.
So some people on social media have pushed back against this legal case, and they argue that Sonia's legal action is, to quote, over the top, and that your legal costs, your legal action will only hurt ratepayers. What do you say to this perspective?
Well, I've been through the quantum of the claim, but we're not arguing quantum with the council, meaning there's not a dispute over, Sonia wants X and they only want to pay Y. That conversation never happened. I mean, it's just bizarre. They're supposed to be minimising the exposure to the community, and they're not even negotiating. And what's apparent to me is after 6 years, don't you think at least the insurance company would have negotiated something? Why is this going to court? It's going to court because nobody wants to pay any money. I don't believe councils' insurances are intact.
Now, is this
I'm not saying that I know that. I question whether their insurances, in fact, are adequate. Otherwise, why would there have been a motion stating that there were gaps in the insurance, leaving large amounts of money for the council to pay? And then when a councillor asked about those gaps recently, he was pushed back and said, "Oh, that was then. This is now. Like, that's in the past." Well, sorry, it's not in the past because Sonia can't get paid.
And is this just about money, or do you think it's also about avoiding accountability?
Well, if you read the statement of claim, it's a public document. It's in the court. There is suggestion that the act of damaging these properties was reckless. And of course, if that were the case, that would amount to a serious indictable offence. What that means is any offence that carries a jail term of 5 or more years. Now, if you do anything to pervert the course of justice, that's a crime with a jail term of 14 years. I won't say any more.
I want to go on a little bit more onto this because I believe that this case has wider implications. Do you think Sonia's case could open the door for others to come forward?
I haven't even thought about that, Chris, and that is a matter for other people. I can say no one has approached me for any assistance. If they did, I'm happy to assist, but no one's approached me.
Could a court ruling in Sonia's favour trigger more legal action or more financial exposure for council?
Well, that would depend on people coming forward, wouldn't it?
Because I do believe that at one of the meetings this year, there was a resident that wanted a clearance certificate for his property so that he could sell the property. And once again, unfortunately, the gang voted down that motion to provide an asbestos clearance certificate. What does this whole saga say about the leadership and integrity of the Snowy Monaro Regional Council?
Well, my journey has suggested that there's an unhealthy, close relationship beyond professional between some of the councillors and some of the senior staff. And while I think good business relations are important, they must remain professional, but I think that line's been crossed.
Now, I just want to talk a little bit about yourself. You've been one of the most consistent advocates for justice in this case. I don't believe it's been done without personal cost, though. What kind of toll has this taken on you personally?
I love it. Look, Chris, it's wrong. From the day I got that letter back from the general manager on the 19th of February 2021, where he says, I'd asked him for a copy of the investigation report, and he says words to the effect, there is no investigation, and we don't intend on doing one because we're following the advice of our insurers. I went, what?
What does that mean?
How can you put the safety of the community behind your insurer? You got to be kidding! This is terrible. And hey, I love it here. I moved here. I was here as a kid. I moved back. I retired here. I love it here. I want a good council, and guess what? So do most of the people that work in that council, and so does the community. It's only being spoilt, like most things, by a few. And we need those few to come on board and have an epiphany or to move on.
Can you identify who those few are?
No. They know who they are.
Now, I believe you were also targeted under Council's unreasonable complainant conduct policy. Why? What happened there? What complaints did you put in?
When the new council was formed in the 6th of January 2022, I wrote to everybody with our findings about some financial matters and about the tank, and called for the then General Manager and Chief Strategy Officer to stand aside while there was an independent inquiry into the matters that I had raised. The letter was never responded to, and on the 11th of March, less than a month later, I received a unreasonable complainant code. And so they weren't going to investigate the complaints. No one said that what I said was untrue. They restricted my ability to do any further investigation, and they restricted my ability to communicate that with anybody within the council.
On what grounds?
That I was sending too much correspondence to them.
Were you being offensive in these correspondences? Were you swearing at them? Were you threatening them?
Chris, I've gippered my file. There is not one staff complaint against me. And
for those that don't know what a GIPper is, can you explain what a GIPper is?
A GIPper is the Government Information Public Access, Government Information Public Access Act. It's the New South Wales equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act. So all government documents, except those that aren't in the public interest, can be made available by making application under the GIPper Act. So I GIPpered my file, and the process for councils to restrict someone are quite stringent. And they're usually the result that, many staff have complained about somebody's behaviour, and council's spoken to this particular person, and this person won't modify their behaviour, and as a consequence, as a very, very last resort, they go, well, sorry, we can't deal with you anymore. We're going to have to restrict you. That would be the normal process. With me, none of that process, no complaints from staff, and no what's called procedural fairness. No, Peter, we're thinking about doing this. We need you to modify your behaviour, because they just wanted the muzzle on me. It was a gag order.
Were you offensive in any of those letters?
No.
It's just so hard to believe that you would be blacklisted for what it seems like just asking legitimate questions.
I was blacklisted for asking the tough questions.
But fortunately, hopefully you're now off that list.
No, I'm still on it.
So you're a resident, you pay your rates,
Mm-hmm.
You haven't committed any offences, legal offences, against any of these council workers, yet you've been blacklisted still after all these years.
Yeah.
Surely there must be a review process.
Well, when there's supposed to be a review process, but they refused to give me one. And then when they did give me one in 2023, it was supposed to be done by somebody other than the person that initiated it in the first instance. But the person that initiated it in the first instance reviewed it. I know, it's crazy. And then in the letter they sent me to say, we're going to leave it in place. We'll review it next year. Well, next year was 2024. We still haven't reviewed it. It's 2025.
No, Peter, I can't believe this. To me, you seem like a perfectly reasonable individual. During this 40-minute discussion, you haven't sworn once. You haven't been offensive once.
I'll try harder for you.
I just can't see why a reasonable person who's a resident of this community would be denied the right to ask questions. Make that make sense.
Well, if you had done something wrong, would you want someone prying into it?
I don't do anything wrong.
And I'm not saying that the council has done anything wrong. that's the only logical conclusion one could draw, because there's no practical reason to. There should be an investigation. There's never been one. There's a statutory obligation to have an investigation. Still, they haven't done one. And of course, Chris, what we've now found out, I've been trying to get safe work notices. They're like a speeding ticket for the council. So I've been asking council to give me their speeding tickets from Safe Work and under GIPA, and they refused to give them to me. And I thought, they're supposed to give those to me. Why won't they give them to me? So I GIPA'd them from Safe Work. 14 notices. That's too many. But what's disturbing is that they confirm what we'd already thought, and that is that they didn't follow the appropriate protocols when they filled the tank. But worse still is that they had no staff training in place adequate for purpose at Yallambee Lodge leading up to the staff calling the police. In other words, if staff had been trained correctly, they would never have had to make the call. And no one's looked at it. And there it was. There's this notice proving that they have failed their safe work or work health and safety duties. And that, in my view, has contributed to Claire Nowlan's death.
That's a very troubling connection that you've made, because a lot of supporters of the gang have said, look, this Cooma Water Tank issue is not a big issue because nobody died. But you've now managed to connect that from one failure to another failure, the failure to manage these aged care centres, which did result in the death of a community member.
And that's attached to the release that I've made public on our Facebook site.
What's the Facebook site name?
Snowy Monaro Community Advocates.
Now, have you faced other professional or personal backlash due to your advocacy?
No.
And the trolls don't get to you?
I just block them.
Now, just some closing thoughts. If you had one message for the gang who continue to block action, what would that be?
Resign. No, I'm serious. They've got no interest in doing the right thing. It's obvious that they've got no intentions of honouring their oath to the community. This community is an unnecessary evil to them.
And finally, what does justice look like for you and for Sonia and for every family who's been ignored?
Chris, in our personal lives, we know problems are normal. And we know it's what we do about them that's important. And the first step to fixing any problem is knowing you have one. These people don't have any problems, so there's nothing to fix. And that's the problem.
Peter, I wish you much success in your legal cases, and I hope that you can score a win for the community. Thank you for all that you do.
And thank you for being our voice.
An honor and pleasure.
It's our fight. We stand as one. We'll make it right. We face the flood, the fire, the strain. Independence rise. We'll break their chain. Among our own strong, we won't be swayed. Truth and justice. it's our fight. We stand as one, we'll make it right. We face the flood, the fire, the strain. Independence rise, we'll break their chain. Monaro strong, we won't be swayed. Truth and justice never fade. Monaro strong, we'll light the way. The time for change, it starts today.